Hello and welcome. At first glance, if you look around India today, you would think that our girls and our women are outshining the men in every field, from the board exams to the boardroom. But as it finally seems like women are now shining in positions of power, whether in politics, whether in banking, whether in the media, whether in law, is that really the case? Is that really the case? All of us sitting here may believe it is the case. But if you look at the statistics, they tell a slightly different and maybe even a slightly depressing story. Many of you in this room may be surprised to know that the female participation in India's labor force has actually gone down from the 1990s instead of coming up. And tonight we'll be talking a little bit about why it is that as more and more women rise to positions of power, that effect is not necessarily percolating down to all women. In a fascinating new book, an anthology of really first-person accounts edited by Naina Lal Kidwai, 30 Women in Power, where some of these extraordinary women tell their story in their voices. Women talk about what many of us ask ourselves every day. Have we really smashed the glass ceiling? Do we continue to struggle in ways and answer questions that men never have to answer? Do we get scrutinized in ways that men never get scrutinized? And another statistic. Some estimates say that 60% of women drop out from their career when they're midstream. Mid-career, 60% of Indian women drop out of the workforce. Forbes had another analysis saying that only 5% of women in the workforce reach the top layer compared to the global average of 20%. Well, in this book, we are hearing from that 5%. And I want to ask them today whether they are the exception rather than the norm, or can their stories prove to be inspirations and examples for all other women listening to them today. So let me introduce some of the extraordinary women on stage. First up, the woman who's actually edited and put together this wonderful anthology, Naina Lal Kidwai, chairperson of HSBC and the editor of 30 Women in Power. Then we're joined by Debjani Ghosh, the managing director of Intel India. Up next is Kirtika Reddy, the managing director of Facebook India, also the first employee of Facebook in India. Shaheen Mistry, the CEO of Teach for India, could have done many things, but instead started this extraordinary program. Shanti Ekambram, president of consumer banking at the Kotak Mahindra Bank. Chitra Ramakrishnan, the managing director and CEO of the National Stock Exchange. And Zia Modi, founding partner of AZB, one of the largest and most influential law firms in the country. Can we please have a round of applause to welcome these women today? I'll start with you, Zia, if I may. In the chapter that you write in the book, there's this very interesting moment that actually demolishes this entire myth of work-life balance. And that's a question that women are asked all the time. And even I personally find it an infuriating question, because no man is ever asked, how do you juggle home and work? But we get asked this all the time. Yet you write, you're always available on your BlackBerry. There is no hour that is closing hour. 4 a.m. can be normal departure. And in one of the most candid admissions that actually also demolishes this whole politically correct constructs of women as parents, you freely admit that there were times that you could not prioritize your children, you prioritized your work instead. You created space for others to bring them up. Were you racked by guilt, or was it just a breeze?
Ask any of the 30 women if they weren't suffering from guilt. The 30 women and many other women in that space have just learned to deal with it and not let it overwhelm you. I think it's a combination of trying to balance passion with fulfilling other things that make you feel whole as well. The reality check is that, at least in my generation, I found that we really had to sacrifice what was called a work-life balance dream, really to the mantra of making sure you got domain, you were visible, you stood up, and you were counted. This generation, I think, has it a little better, and I hope they appreciate us for it. But I think at that stage, time was the enemy, and visibility and making sure you stayed on that path was key.
You know, almost all of you have written that you couldn't have done it without family support structures. And while this is the truth of our lives, it's also a bit problematic because we do not say to men, Zia, that unless your mother-in-law helps you, you can't make it big. So it just seems like an essentially misogynistic place to start from.
But that's the reality. And how much do you want to fight anything? You're a woman, you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a daughter-in-law, and you just have to revel and maximize all these roles. So as far as I was concerned, I got a piece of advice when I was getting married from my mother who said, you're not marrying your husband, you're marrying your mother-in-law. So go talk to her and get on with her and don't come back to me every weekend and complain about her. So you have to make allies of the people who can support you lovingly. You can't have a mother-in-law who grudgingly takes care of your kids. You're going to have a fight with your husband every day. You can't have a fight with your husband every day because then you won't go to work after some time. So you have to, as a woman, intelligently, strategically, affectionately navigate how you are going to succeed in what you are passionate about.
Chitra, does that not increase the amount of pressure? Because if while you're thinking of what to do next at work, and you're already fighting these societal pressures that judge, and I still believe the society judges a woman for being ambitious in a way that it doesn't judge men, and you're also saying I have to build allies at home, and like what if you don't like your mother-in-law? I mean, someone has to address the elephant in the room.
You know, I think there has to be a driving reason for you to step up and do what you're doing. So I always find that if you have clarity that you want to move ahead and do something, whatever we define as meaningful in our lives, a lot of other forces align themselves to it and you find solutions around you. You are resourceful enough to find people who will help you in sort of supporting your endeavor. And they will do it happily for the simple reason that you have the conviction of what you are carrying forward.
One of the things that you talk about is how the financial sector is largely gender agnostic. I was surprised to read that because when we go to school, you know, banking and numbers and math and that stream is not necessarily something that people still associate with women. If you look at the board exam results, it defies those stereotypes. But I was curious to know why you said that your sector is gender agnostic.
You know, that I speak largely from my own experience. And I started out in a development banking institution. And I can say that even 25, 30 years ago, there were a significant number of women in the workforce in these places. And in the institutions where I worked, I never really felt a sense of a discrimination between, you know, the male and the female counterparts there.
Shanti Kambram, you wrote something that I have to say really spoke to me because it was not the usually politically correct formulation. And actually that's what's been so refreshing, Naina, about this book. That you say, I've never faced a glass ceiling. The problem is often exacerbated by women themselves by not having the confidence to keep pushing. One of the things that I want to ask you about is, does our gender sometimes seek protection at the workplace, different working hours, different privileges? Do we in fact make it tougher for ourselves to be seen as competitive players?
So firstly, I don't think that the gender needs any special privileges or any special dispensation, except perhaps when a woman is expecting. Maybe, you know, a little care, that's all, in the organization space. But otherwise, the answer is no. And the reason I made that statement is, you know, as you go higher up in the organization, like it or not, you are amongst men, right? So I find many times women find it tough, if they have a point of view, to have the confidence to stand up and express it in a room full of men. And I've seen it specifically around me, and I encourage many women to say, don't be afraid. Stand up.
And you know, talking about sort of some breathing space when you're pregnant, Zia, you write about sort of scurrying about the corridors of the Bombay High Court when you were pregnant, and you actually say that you became the butt of jokes. You know, people were making jokes, and that the judge finally told you that I hope I don't have to see you in this condition again because you were working right till the very end. Every time I talk to women, and you know, I've been interviewing a lot of women in the armed forces, and one of the things that's holding them back from combat roles is that their superiors will tell them, but what about when you get pregnant? Now, do you not think, Zia, that till we learn to encourage equal parenting at home, till fathers' roles are as critical as mothers, till we see them the same way, there can be no equality at work till there's equality at home.
Parka, you can't dream the impossible so quickly. You have
You
to
can hope
make do.
and you can fight for it.
You can hope, and maybe my granddaughter. But you know, if I sat around fighting with my husband as to whether he changed 5 nappies and I changed 6, get it? You know, what did I want? I wanted a husband who supported me, who was proud of me, who wasn't insecure in any shape or form, who was as confident under his skin, and who wanted to push me out. I don't mind changing a lot of more nappies because of that, right? So, is it going to stay this way? Yeah, it's a genetic, wonderful happiness that we have, I think, which is more than our spouses have. So we have the joy of motherhood, and yes, in time there will be more equal parenting. But in India, I don't know, all these good men in this room, I don't know if they'd still want to be changing nappies or encouraging their sons to do so.
But isn't that what it's all about?
But you've got to overcome that.
I mean, I wonder why we don't give paternity leave for as long as we give maternity leave.
But that's the easy part.
What do they do with that paternity leave is the tough part.
What he does with his paternity leave. I remember having a joke where I had my 3rd child, and I remember after a week saying bye-bye to my husband who said, I'm so stressed, I need a holiday. And I said, I've just had a 3rd kid, right? But he was off on his holiday. So that's life.
Devjani, you write very interestingly, we are expected to be domestic goddesses whether or not we have an ambition. Now, I want you to speak a little bit about ambition in women. A lot of women are still apologetic about being ambitious. A lot of women are seen as bitches. Forgive me because that word is used for women. Ruthless bitches if they're ambitious, and if the man is ambitious, he's driven and strong. Are women out of the shadow of this word called ambition? Have we learned not to judge ourselves for being ambitious? I know that Zia, you wrote, I was consumed so completely by the law that there was no space for an idyllic work-life balance. And a lot of us may feel that.
Yeah, you know, Barka, interestingly, I spend a lot of time mentoring young girls. And the one thing they struggle the most with is admitting the fact that they want to put their career ahead of everything else. Yeah. That's the biggest struggle. I am going to be a failure if I do that. And why? Because then I can't do all the things my mother did. I can't cook the perfect biryani at home, and I can't raise the perfect kid, and if I do this, I'm going to be a bad woman. Yeah. And the advice I give them is we really have to redefine that whole definition of woman. We have to rethink it because we are never going to match up to our mothers and our grandmothers because they had a different life in some ways.
But you know, we are socialized. We have been socialized. We can't dismiss this insidious influence of socialization on us.
You know, and that's what companies are doing today, actually. The whole gender sensitization program that we have, because that's what you have to do if you want to keep them. You talked about women dropping off. They don't drop off because they're becoming pregnant and because they're going to need to go home and deliver kids. They're dropping off because of all these issues. Because what if, after I become pregnant, what if I come back to my career? Who is going to look after the kid? And that's where we have to work if you really want to keep the woman in the pipeline from entry to a senior level. This is what you have to work with them on. You have to work with them on just getting that confidence back. Yeah. And stop questioning themselves at every single point in life.
And you know, I think a lot of us forget that not so long ago, the glass ceiling was so much more real than it is today. And you know, I'm the daughter of a journalist, and when my mother went to apply for a job in the Hindustan Times, she was told that women are only allowed to cover flower shows. And she became the first woman to go to the front line and cover a war. And 3 decades later, when I went to Kargil and I wanted to go, the army still told me you can't go because you're a woman. So some things change and some things don't. And Naina, as the editor of this wonderful book, such a strong voice, otherwise for women, I know you've lost your voice today, but you know, your own story is so interesting. You go to PricewaterhouseCoopers for a job in the 1970s and you're told they don't hire women. I mean, what are they saying to you today? Like they must be just kicking themselves, right?
Well, the good news is they changed.
They changed, yes. Yeah, they did change. And you, one of the other things you say is choose your husband carefully. He's there.
Very carefully.
Very carefully. Now, now I just have to ask you, like you women seem to know these men I thought were mythical. I mean, are they really that calm about the number of hours you keep at work? Do they really never pick a fight with you about it? Do they really never say, you have no time for me?
Well, there's always a negotiation.
There's always a negotiation. And that negotiation, and Naina, you're right, the first Indian woman to go to the Harvard Business School in the 1980s. I mean, I'm just staggered. Kirtika, you wrote so movingly that when you were born, your grandparents wouldn't visit the hospital because you were a girl. This is not so long ago.
Yeah.
How did knowing that shape you as a woman and a female professional?
When this happened, they all thought it was going to be a boy, but it was a girl. I was the second child, and by then they were convinced it was going to be a boy. They even had a name picked out, Karthik. But then, lo and behold, there I come, and my mom was crying in the hospital that my grandfather wouldn't come and visit. And she tells me the story that my dad came up to her and said, if we have a third child, we will still have a girl, and we will call her Kanchana. Right? So it's one of those, it's very symbolic in that from the day I was born, again, I had men and women strongly looking out for me. And that was a pattern that really continued.
And then you write about how when you have your children, you travel with them. You want to nurse them through working. And, it's my job to be a little bit of the cynic in the room, but all of you make it sound so easy. I just don't believe that it was easy. I just don't believe that there weren't breakdown moments. I just don't believe that there were not moments when you said, oh my God, I'm going to get left behind in my work because right now I'm looking after the children. I mean, all of us struggle with that.
So it was not easy.
Thank you for saying that.
No, not easy.
Yes.
I think Zia talked about guilt, and guilt management is as much a skill as time management and all of the other skills that we will develop. But I remember my first child, I think when she was 3 months, I went and dropped her at the daycare, and I handed the baby over, and I had tears in my eyes. Of all of the decisions that I've made, whether it's business investment decisions, hiring, firing, the daycare that my child would go to was the biggest and the hardest decision that I made. And when I dropped her, I was crying, and I remember the caretaker looking at me and saying, listen, your baby is going to be fine. She's going to sleep, wake up, eat, and sleep. What you have to ask yourself is, are you going to be fine leaving her and going? Yeah? And really, that's what it's all about.
And Zia, you write about the parent-teachers meeting being a big part of your life, but not necessarily being able to do that much more. And I'm just wondering, that struggle is what women talk about all the time. And a lot of women actually opt not to have a child sometimes because they feel it doesn't fit in with their career. And I mean, I know I've certainly struggled with that. And I said, if I want to go off to Libya or Egypt, if I had a child, what would I do? I'm just wondering if you had those struggles, that, how does my life have the room for a child? Because it's automatically assumed that all women want to be mothers. And actually, you can't make that assumption anymore. It's very individual.
It is individual, but my personal belief is that you would be inadequate as a person, myself, if I didn't have that role as a mother.
Would you apply that to fathers too?
Well, I think so. I think, it is a natural way of life, and you have to take a very concerted decision as to why you want to say a yay or a nay, and then it's your decision. But you try and make the best of most of the parts. And I went to the PTA because my husband refused to go to the PTA. And he said, I'm doing enough. This is your role. And I never missed the PTA, come hell or high water. But was I always busy, wanting to request the mother to let me go first and not stand in line if the math teacher was there or the English teacher was there? Sure I was. And did I get maybe a little more angry with the kid if she got a bad report than some calmer mother? Probably. But you go on.
My theory about women who do well is that they're not calm. I mean, would you agree? You all look very calm, but...
No, not at all.
Devjani?
No.
Is calmness another superwoman trait that's foisted on us?
Calmness is completely overrated.
Oh,
right?
I so love you for saying that. I'm the most uncalm person I know.
So this is what I struggle with, right? Because just because I am a woman, You're supposed to look a certain way, you're supposed to behave a certain way, you're supposed to have this maternal instincts at work, and I don't. Right? In fact, the feedback I get more often than not is I'm too aggressive for a woman, and I don't know how much aggression is okay for a woman. I know what is okay for me, and that's who I am. I think you can't sort of put us in these compartments saying, because you look like this, this is how we'll behave. And I just, for the life of me, I don't get why it's perfectly okay for a guy to sit in a room and thump the table and make his point. So the moment you do that, you become the bad person in the room, you know, and that has to change.
Shaheen, is there a generational shift in this gender conversation? I think Zia made the point that a lot of women today don't even know what it was like. And I suspect that the misogyny element is much more covert today than overt. People are a little more careful about it being in your face. It's still there, though.
I think one of my learnings is just that so much of this is just the way that you look at it. One of our teachers went out and met a 12-year-old child at the Haji Ali signal. And she sat down and spoke to him, and she said, tell me about your life and tell me about your problems. He just kept saying, I don't have any problems, I don't have any problems. And yet he said, the police come and throw the books into the water, and I live on the street, and she couldn't understand. And finally, this 12-year-old kid turned to her and said, why are you so insistent on having me see my life as problem? Of course I have challenges, don't you? And I'm beginning to just feel more and more that whether it's the work-life balance thing, whether it's the gender thing, it just, the lens through which we see our lives makes such a difference. And that's the differentiator that I'm seeing with.
This is an interesting point. And I think a lot of women who do well don't want to be seen through a gender prism, Shanti. Like, you don't want to be known as woman who became this. You're just a person, right? But as defensive as we are about being tagged by our gender, I think as you grow older, you do realize that there is a way that you're put under a magnifying glass, Naina, to borrow a phrase from your chapter, that men are not. Hillary Clinton once said to me in an interview that, why is it that every time the media writes about me, they say Hillary Clinton, then parentheses, and describe what I'm wearing? I've never seen that being done for Obama.
In my view, success itself is gender agnostic.
Success is gender agnostic?
Success is gender agnostic. For being successful, you need certain basic traits. Competence, passion. You can't get away from hard work and loving what you do. Now, what difference does it make if you're a male or a female for that? The ingredients required for good leadership and success is gender agnostic. I mean, if there is something that you need to get done, you need to get done, whether it's 8 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, how does it matter?
And yet, Zia and many of you just said, get real, Barkha, of course you need a support structure. Now, if as a woman my success is dependent on my husband and my in-laws, how is the workplace a level playing field for me?
Which is where I said, there are certain ingredients personally that you need for success. Whether you're a man or a woman doesn't matter, okay? Then you talk about the ecosystem, to say, do I have an ecosystem that will help me, ensure that I can focus on my success and the confidence that I have to make it successful. You can't get away from it, as Zia said. So why do we question it? Why do we keep questioning it all the time to say, why is it gender agnostic? My belief is success is gender agnostic. Yes, there are challenges.
But the journey to get to that success, is the journey to get to that success gender agnostic?
There is one generation and there is another generation. I think about 25 years ago, it was much more difficult because there were so few women around. Today, I see many more women, and I see this generation, the people who are coming to work, willing to take it in their stride and move on and do what it takes.
So let me get a perspective from two generations then, Zia and Kirtika. Zia, I'll start with you. You were disagreeing, and you write in your chapter about how nobody actually took a female junior lawyer seriously. When did you get to that point where you were taken seriously? Like how does that happen for women?
When I got fat and bad temper.
Okay, more seriously.
Oh, I think that, it is a reality of life. And why I say so is we do a lot of work where we advise large families on how to manage wealth, how to manage succession, how to manage issues that crop up. And by and large, it's management with the man And yes, we'll be fair to the girl when it comes to ownership, by and large.
Yeah.
So if you see that thought process, it is still going to take a couple of generations to change. But what has changed? I think probably what has changed is that there is a concept of ownership for the woman. Earlier, it was she goes to her husband's house and she takes his wealth, and my wealth stays with my boy. I'm a great believer in small steps. I don't think there are too many big bang things that happen in life except for, inventions. And so society has to actually go through a catharsis. That never happens overnight. But what is really refreshing that I feel, a lot of us here are on stage today because of our male mentors. And I think we undermine them when we don't think of them often enough. And a lot of my challenge is to make the good, strong, young, energetic men in our firm male mentors.
Yeah.
I think that's 50% of the battle. And it will take a generation, it will take 2 generations. It shall happen.
In fact, Zia, you made a very interesting point that there's one common factor across all 30 stories, nearly all the 30 stories, and that's the role our fathers have played in our lives. Each one of us had a very strong father, most of us.
Interesting, because usually it's the female role model, but all of you have...
All of us have talked about, at least most of us have talked about the role our fathers have, and how they've encouraged us to take those risks and do those things that everyone else was saying no.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I mean, that's the thing that struck me the most when I was reading the story.
And just to get in your perspective, the pressure to get married, I'm just wondering how that plays out on choices. And whether it remains a pressure that women face more than men, and does it impact the career in different ways?
Yeah. So, Barka, I just want to also take the previous question
sure.
on, and then I'll answer this. So I agree that the traits of leadership and success are gender agnostic. However, even today, I do believe that the journeys are different, right? And part of it is just how people are wired. There's all kinds of stats. Even research studies as of 2 years ago, 57% of men in a graduating class negotiate, 7% of women negotiate, right? And then when we talk about the gender gap, it's like, okay, it does go back to, at the end of the day, it's us who are empowered to make the difference.
Yeah.
But there are these statistics that exist.
And women are dropping out of the workforce, and in all our workplaces, women are leaving jobs especially after they get married. And we are not, I think, looking at that fact head on. Chitra, if you want to come in on that.
I think this whole issue about whether it is gender agnostic and whether there is a magnifying glass through which we all have to pipe up. Some of this will obviously be true in different situations. But I think there is an equal amount of response situation which many of us gear up to, and you sort of build it over time, which is that this is distractionary at some point. So when you do have a strong sense of purpose, and you realize that this is distractionary, then you learn to have a way to deal with this as really not that important. And then the community around you, or the people with whom you deal with, also start to relegate it to the background. And I think that's a very important mechanism which we all equip ourselves with, so that we sort of leave this behind, and then the peer group with whom you deal with deals with you on merit. But the question you ask is something that definitely we as an organization, I'm sure many other organizations, have to be very cognizant about, that we do see that there is particular crossroads at which women still are caught up in that dilemma. So they don't know if it's okay to take a break. Is it okay to sort of do freelance and come back to a mainstream career? And when they don't know, frankly, nobody else can answer this for them, right? But what can organizations do in terms of support structure? So do you penalize women when they take two years off and they come back? Do you put them on a slower track? Is there unwritten rules around this? Do you think when they work out of flexible hours for a few months, it goes against them in their performance appraisals?
But here there might be women, and this is an interesting question if anyone wants to jump into this. What if there is a woman who, faced with that dilemma, says, no, I prioritize my work, and another woman who takes those 2 years off. Is it fair to the woman who doesn't take the time off that the woman who takes the time off is brought back on the same track at the same position?
Actually, let me put it to you another way, if I can just continue with this discussion. You know, we are focusing on what we call a handicap or a disadvantage with which a employee is dealing with.
Yeah.
But is that not a great amount of focus on just one set of disadvantages? For example, you know, when you come into a hiring situation, when you come out of a campus, suppose someone has come from a Mofussil town, and somebody is coming from an urban, there is a difference. Right?
Sure.
So somebody comes from an English-speaking background, somebody doesn't. There are always differences. And all that I'm saying is that when we come, we all come with different sets of advantages and disadvantages. And maybe it's really important for us as, you know, women to ensure that this limelight is brought back and that this is not such a big deal. Right? And so if we are able to bring that also in workforces, in an organization, and keep drawing the fact that there will always be bundles of advantages and disadvantages, what in general terms we can address, we will address through a policy. You know.
Nana, one of the things you actually write in your chapter is it's easier for women to succeed in India than in other parts of the world. And actually, I don't know how many of you know, but in America, there is no guaranteed paid maternity leave. And this is an irony that, you know, when they look at India as this horrible country for women, I always say that to my American friends. But I am still disturbed by this declining participation in the labor force. And I think we have to acknowledge that we as women in this room today have not had to make the conventional choices, have probably not faced the conventional pressures, that the large mass of women in the labor force, it's not increasing. That number is not increasing.
I think women, I better not try.
Just try as much as you can.
I think diversity in the workplace
Diversity in the workplace.
works very well for India. The fact that we have people from all over the country, the fact that you don't have to play golf and go out and drink beer with the boys on Thursday, it helps.
Very interesting. You don't have to go out and play golf and drink beer with the boys on Thursday. But I can tell you that some women do feel, I mean, I know that there are still clubby professions where sometimes women do feel left out. Now, Shaheen, I want to bring you in. You said, why foist a problem if there isn't a problem? And I'm hearing that from a lot of you. And I'm not actually necessarily saying there's a problem.
Not
I'm just saying the battles are kind of different.
Not that there isn't a problem, just I think to echo what Chitra said, I just believe life is difficult for most people. It's difficult if you're poor, it's difficult if you're old, it's difficult if you're sick, and in some cases it's difficult if you're a woman, but I just think the more we can show examples that despite this, it's possible, and today highlight more than the problems, what we are doing in our workplaces. I mean, at Teach for India, like, there's no reason why you would need to leave Teach for India. Like, there's flexible work hours, you can work from home, you can bring your kid to the office.
But can men do that too? I'm very obsessed with this idea of equal parenting at home because I think if that doesn't happen, women will continue to struggle with these things. So I'm just wondering, is flexi hours an option available to stay-at-home dads?
Yeah, for everybody.
It is.
No, not in enough places in India. I mean, so I'm just saying we don't really. And Zia's looking at me in this kind of barkha, which world do you live in, right?
I think, you know, the bottom line is, as someone said, there is a war for talent.
Yes.
And talent has won.
Yes.
And so what is the reality? Compared to 20 years ago, good people, good employees are at a premium. Now, if you are a male employer and even vaguely intelligent, if you have invested years in a female resource, trained her, mentored her, taken her up the hoops, and then mentally you're willing to dump her in your important scale of things because she's had to go and get pregnant for a little while and God forbid become a mother, well then you're stupid.
Correct.
Not many men are that stupid anymore. Because there are fewer people for them to hitch their talent pole onto.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think it's business. I think the whole situation is looking to how much flexibility do I have to give to bring back that resource that provides me great effective relief and can be my future ambassador. And if she's a woman, it's okay. I have to deal with it. And I'll deal with it in a much more smarter way today in 2015 than I dealt with it in 2000, when there were a lot more many men and women were more expendable.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Shanti, if I can bring you in on something, women in negotiations of especially talking about money. Now, it's just interesting because a lot of women I know, they're very successful, very talented, they do very well, but they find it really difficult to say, pay me more. You know, and I'm not saying everyone has that problem. I don't know why Zia is saying no.
Less women are having that problem.
But I don't know if any of you have experienced this, that when it comes to women and money, there's still a kind of gap for themselves. They can negotiate for everybody else, but negotiating for themselves is sometimes, they're coy about it.
You know, I think it's quite individualistic. It's again true. If you don't stand up and say you need to pay my, whatever I'm worth, you will get paid less.
Yes.
Right? That's a fact of life.
Yes.
Let me put it this way. And again, I find this a woman trait.
Yeah.
They don't put money as a number one thing in their lives. It's a very woman trait. It's not so for a guy. He finds it competitive. I must get paid as good as well as the next person. How much did he get over me, etc. I find women saying if they are getting paid what they believe they're getting paid, they're contented. But they don't put money as a number one thing. And that is perhaps looked at as if we are not negotiating for ourselves or somebody is not negotiating for self. And I can tell you, they can be as hard negotiators when they want to be. So I don't think that is necessarily true. So it is not because they don't negotiate. When they negotiate, they get it. It is perhaps, I find women's level of contentment more than men. And I deal with both men and women in equal numbers. I find that women's level of contentment is much higher. For them, the job, the environment, the boss, the ability to juggle is more important than number one, money. It may not be so with men.
And yet, more guys will chase you almost into the loo, and the women who can chase you there don't.
Okay, I have to repeat that for everybody. And yet, more guys will chase you into the loo for trying to get more money, and the women who should don't. So you're agreeing with me. You're agreeing with me that women find it tougher to ask for more money.
They're more contented. So I'm saying they don't.
But is that a good
thing? As if
is that a good thing? Even our film stars, only
No, it's
now
not a
you
good
have women.
thing.
It's not a
10 years
good thing.
later,
It's not a
they'll
good-
ask for more money.
What was here?
10 years later, they'll ask for more
10
money.
years later, 10 years later, they'll chase you into the loo. Okay.
In order to ask for money, I need to first stand up and say, what have I done? And why do I think it's good? How many of us do that? We expect our work to speak for us. We all do.
Yeah.
We all do a good job and we say our work will speak for us, right? Doesn't happen. Totally doesn't happen in most cases. The guys are all out there. They're standing there and they're telling the world how great they are, and we don't do it. And I think that's what we have to change first before we go and negotiate. Otherwise, what do we negotiate for? So most of the time, the guy we are negotiating with may not even know half of the stuff we've done.
So I want to ask all of you in the end, what's the toughest moment of your lives where you haven't been able to escape your gender, where somewhere subconsciously or consciously it's made a difference to your professional choice? And now's the time. If anyone has a last comment to make, we've got just 5 minutes left. So I'll start with you, Chitra. What has been the toughest moment in your journey so far?
Frankly, I think the toughest situation or the toughest challenge for me has been how to improve the ratio of middle management moving to senior management within the organization. What are the things we can do to juggle to get that number up?
And for you personally?
Well, you know, it's been different things at different points of time. So when we started out, it was about whether one will be able to prove yourself. And as you go along, it is more about really, challenging yourself on a day-to-day basis. Do you know you're doing enough? You know, do you need to do more? Are you getting complacent? I think that's really the biggest question I ask myself every day.
Shanti?
Personally, I think I always say, have I done better than what I have done last week? Similarly, echoing Chitra's theme. So there's this constant competitive anxiety within oneself. So I think that's
Competitive
more
anxiety is an
anxiety. I
interesting
call it
phrase.
competitive anxiety, that am I still,
Yeah.
have I lost it kind of a thing. I think that's, so it is different at different times. But from an organization perspective, I find what I call the second innings in women much more difficult to handle for women themselves from a confidence perspective.
Yeah.
And it's again bringing that contentment factor back. When women come back after a break, it's toughest, and that's where you will see maximum dropout, A, at the initial beginning, and second at the second innings.
Naina, any last thoughts?
At the end of the day, if you want to make both succeed, you manage work and home. And it isn't a challenge, it's just making sure that you find the balance for yourself.
So if you want to make both work and home succeed, you do. It's just finding the balance for yourself. Devjani? I think some of us spend our lives looking for that balance.
Totally, and you're talking about personal challenges. My biggest personal challenge, I think, or thing that I question a lot, is the fact that I decided to prioritize my career over everything else.
Yeah.
It became the one thing that mattered in my life.
Yeah. And did you ever regret that?
I feel good about it, but there are nights when you will sit and question that and say, did you do the right thing? And there are times where you'll have to justify it to yourself. But I don't know how many guys have to do that, but we definitely do. And there's,
I relate to that.
You can't run away from it, right?
Kritika?
As I think about the most significant business challenges, it actually is not gender specific. I think the one thing that I think about all the time is, am I dreaming big enough? And the typical adage of, if your dreams don't scare you, they're probably not right, and they don't make the most of your potential. So always thinking about, am I thinking big enough?
Shahid?
I think mine is just thinking about the thousands of kids that I've worked with and the thousands of girls, and just seeing that incredible potential and knowing that we're so far from even giving them what they need to be having this conversation and seeing this barrier. And so I think my life and challenges always pale in comparison to that.
I'll give Zia the last word. You went up against your dad in court and you lost.
Twice.
Twice? Did you lose on merit or just solely just...
God knows.
God knows. So why are you called the Big Mama as your chapter is called?
I think because somewhere along, the girls call me Big Mama.
And the boys?
They avoid letting me know what they call me. But I think it's because my door's always open, and I am, after 10 o'clock at night, mostly psychologist. I think that's part of my job, to retain our fabulous women. And I think the fact that they can come and just let themselves go and just sit on a chair and tell me what their problems are and actually expect Big Mama advice, I think that's why they call me that.
Well, I think all of you have had extraordinary journeys. I hope they will inspire so many more women who read this book. And I must allow Rashi the word.
Thanks. It's been phenomenal listening to the contributors and reading the book and hearing the stories. But the fact of the matter is, men have been in the workplace for many decades. Women are recent entrants. Fortunately, more of them are increasing. So numbers that you have to choose from in terms of experience and competence is more with men. And therefore, you have more senior men. My question is, how come no one talks about the mother bias? The mother is the one who gives the best food to the son. The mother is the one who ensures that the son gets a better education than the daughter. Till we address that, how are you going to sort this out?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I think it's about changing times, and it will take its time. I know that my mom, so after the grandfather story, my mom, she wasn't allowed to study more than 6th grade because her parents told her, enough math to do the laundry bill and the grocery bill. You don't need to study any further, right? So then if you think about the change that has happened in one generation, we are 2 daughters, both of us have postgraduate degrees, successful careers. So I'm very hopeful, just in one generation seeing the change. But I'll also add, given your obsession about equal parenting, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how easy are we making it for the men, right? Even simple things like in the school that my kids go to, there is a mom's WhatsApp group. And when I asked for Dave to be added, because I'm traveling, I might not get a message, it actually had to go through a whole approval process.
Okay, that's nuts, right? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Good point, and I'm seeing another hand go up. Let's get the mic there.
I just wondered, as women in power, women who have had tremendous choices, like all of us in this room perhaps, how has that impacted your relationship with junior staff in your office, with women who work in your house? I know it's annoying for me when I want to get my work done and somebody hasn't turned up for work because they have to take their mother to hospital or their child to the doctor, or the maid wants to tell me all about her problems with her health. How has it been for you? Has it made you more sympathetic? Have you felt you should favor these women?
And you know, one thing we didn't talk about is caregiving to the elderly. Like, I think most women have cracked a way between daycare and domestic help and mother-in-laws and grandparents for their children. But when your own parents are growing older, or your in-laws, you know, so it's just anyone who wants to take, Shanti, if you want to take that question, how does it impact?
Actually, it's not been that much of a problem because, you know, it doesn't happen every day. And the way I look at it is, in today's wired world, at the end of the day, the work must get done. See, in a professional organization, you have to meet your deadlines, get your work done. As far as women are concerned, too, they manage to ensure that they get their work done. That's the way I look at it, and I deal with the situation to say, you can work from home, there is no problem. In wired way today, you have, you know, you're wired up all the time.
Okay, I'm going to take a last question at the back.
There has been recent news in the newspapers that some of these banks, including some of the public sector banks, are conducting pregnancy tests on the potential candidates. And I didn't see...
on potential candidates?
Yes.
I think what I'm hearing him say is that some of the public sector banks are asking new entrants to reveal whether they're pregnant or not, or do a pregnancy test before they join, right? Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, my question is, how does the women leadership in the banks see an issue such as this?
I think it should be discouraged. I don't think that you should conduct tests before hiring someone, are you pregnant? I don't think that's correct. Right? Now, if they're trying to see from a resourcing perspective 9 months later, that's a different perspective. But I think that's discrimination at the time of hiring.
It's not a female leader problem, it's a leadership problem. It's a leadership
issue.
failure.
Yeah.
If your organization is doing something as ridiculous as that, it's a leadership failure. This is not a gender problem. This is just someone up there doesn't have his or her act together. So
all right, on that note, I am going to say thank you. Let's have a big round of applause for all our guests.